Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the velvet curtains on a shadowy corner of Victorian life, where chandeliers flicker over starched collars and respectable people whisper to the dead across tables that sometimes whisper back. You step into a candlelit parlor layered with lace and mahogany, where the perfume of lavender water mixes with the faint scent of warmed upholstery. The air is thick not just with incense, but anticipation. There's a hush, a thud, a rattle of something beneath your seat. And that's when you notice the furniture in this room. It's watching you. This is no ordinary antique shop fantasy. These chairs were designed to groan on cue. These tables are hollow with purpose. And that sideboard over there? Don't lean on it, it doubles as a spirit cabinet. Welcome to the world of Victorian-Era Seance furniture. Yes, it's real. And no, you probably won't survive this dinner party with your skepticism intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a plush, patterned rug into a parlor lined with antimacassars and doilies. It's the 1870s, and the spiritualist movement is in full swing. Across England and America, well-bred ladies are convening not just to gossip about lace patterns or the latest elopement scandal, but to speak to the dearly departed. Of course, they need proper furniture for that. Nothing says commune with spirits like a creaky, ornate chair that groans louder than your knees after leg day. At the heart of it all is the séance tablier, stout, round, often three-legged wooden contraption, small enough to gather a tight circle of nervous hands, but wide enough to conceal some mischief underneath. The classic séance table was carefully crafted for the job. Mediums needed something lightweight yet solid, with a certain bounce, so it could wobble at the right moment accidentally on purpose. It helped if the table was ever so slightly off-kilter or featured a central pedestal base, which made tilting effortless with just the nudge of a shin or discreet toe tap. Here's the kicker. Many of these tables weren't just old furniture pressed into mystical service, they were purpose-built. That's right. Imagine telling your local carpenter in 1872, "Yes, I like a table, but could you make it rock slightly to the left when I clench my thighs?" Historians still argue whether most mediums commissioned trick furniture or simply exploited the quirks of wobbly Victorian construction. After all, this was the era when even an enthusiastic sneeze could make a bookshelf collapse. But one thing's clear. There was more going on beneath these lace-trimmed surfaces than just sentimental longing. You sit down carefully in a floral cushioned chair that might have known Queen Victoria's weight. It creaks. Of course it creaks. But was that you or someone else? Welcome to the power of suggestion, where every groan, draft, or flickering candle becomes a spectral event. Mediums relied on it, and the furniture was the supporting actor. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some spiritualist circles, tables weren't just tools, they were sentient beings. Practitioners referred to them affectionately, even giving them names like Old Rocker or Mother's Messenger. They'd wrap them in velvet shawls when not in use, like comforting an exhausted friend who just spent an hour channeling Uncle Bernard from beyond the veil. You lean closer as the lights dim, the flame in the gas sconce faltering. Around the table, fingers touch, some trembling, some suspiciously firm. The medium murmurs in a language that might be French or possibly nonsense. There's a knock, then another. The table lurches. You swear it just leaned toward the woman in mourning gloves, who gasps and mutters, "It's him, always did lean left." A polite chuckle ripples around the circle, and yet no one's laughing that hard. There's an uneasy reverence in the room, the sense that even if this is theater, it's theater performed with full belief. You feel the tension crackle in the air like static before a storm. It's one thing to play along, quite another to watch the table tilt toward you with nobody touching it, at least not above the surface. This is what made Victorian seances so popular. Not just the hope of contacting lost loved ones, but the thrill, the eerie feeling that something else is in the room. That maybe you weren't imagining that touch on your shoulder, or the table inching toward the window. That maybe the furniture had a mind of its own. And let's not forget the theatrics. These were not solemn affairs. Seances were entertainment. Spectacles, often scheduled between the soup course and the sherry. Guests would come dressed in black lace, corsets creaking, monocles gleaming with expectation. Parlors would be rearranged like small theaters, complete with heavy curtains, dimmed lamps, and of course the centerpiece table. One particularly flamboyant medium, Mrs. Arabella Crowley, famously used a specially designed mahogany table with internal gears that could produce raps in 3 distinct tones. 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 for please refill my wine. She charged double for seances involving musical tapping. The whole performance hinged on furniture that did just enough to be spooky, but not so much as to be obviously rigged unless, of course, you were in on the trick. A little creak here, a mysterious tilt there, and suddenly your Aunt Mildred was sobbing into her gloves, convinced Grandpa Rupert had come to say hello. And yet, not everyone was charmed. Even back then, skeptics pointed out how easily these tables seemed to dance in the presence of the host's foot. Some mediums would insist on total darknessless for the spirits, more to obscure what their legs were doing. Others swore they could produce activity even under scientific conditions, which suspiciously never included a carpet-free floor. Still, whether you believed or not, it was hard to resist the drama. The moment the table rocked forward, candles flickering, and someone gasped, "He's here," your heart raced a little. Not because you were convinced, necessarily, but because for a moment it was nice to pretend. And as the session wraps, you hear the final creak of wood against wood. Maybe it was just the old house settling. Maybe it was something else. Either way, you rise slowly, eyes still scanning the table as if it might rise again. Just a chair. Just a table. Just furniture. Right? You stay seated just a little longer, staring at the table as if it might wink at you. It doesn't, of course, but the thought lingers. You shift your gaze across the parlor, to the other side of this overstuffed room with its walls striped in sepia-toned wallpaper and crowned with plaster cherubs. The atmosphere is syrupy with the weight of candle wax and anticipation. Now, everyone's leaning in. The table, though motionless, seems charged as if it's the eye of some invisible storm. And then it happens. One of the seated ladies yelps, recoiling as the table bucks forward. Not much, just an inch, maybe 2. But enough. Someone drops their teacup. Another gasps. And the medium? She's unmoved, lips parted slightly in what could be concentration or a smirk. Welcome to the spectacle of table tipping. This peculiar parlor pastime, also known as table turning or table talking, was the gateway séance activity of the Victorian era. The idea was simple. Everyone places their fingertips lightly on the tabletop, and then they wait. The spirits, if willing and well-tempered, would tip or rotate the table in response to questions. A single knock for yes, 2 for no, 3 for maybe or possibly. I'm a Victorian ghost and communication isn't my strong suit. To modern ears, it might sound absurd. A circle of grown adults, many of them prominent in society, waiting for a wobbly table to deliver the wisdom of the dead. But in the mid-1800s, this was cutting-edge spiritual technology. It offered both mystique and interaction like a ghostly game night, with none of the fun board pieces. You reach out now, placing your hands gently atop the polished wood. The surface is smooth, but just imperfect enough that your fingers don't quite trust it. You feel the tension in the room, eyes darting, breath shallow. And then the table trembles. Historians still argue whether the earliest practitioners believed in the phenomenon or merely found it too entertaining to stop. What began as a quasi-religious exercise in Germany and France morphed into an English-language parlor craze faster than you can say spiritual synergy. By 1853, people were table tipping everywhere from aristocratic estates in Sussex to cramped tenements in Manchester. Of course, skeptics had a few theories. Some blamed subconscious muscular movements, a phenomenon now known as the ideomotor effect. Others claimed it was flat-out trickery, pointing to suspiciously fidgety knees and shoes that conveniently slipped under table legs. One particularly bold clergyman attended a séance with metal-soled boots and grounded the table with copper wire. It didn't move an inch. He was never invited back. But the believers? Oh, they had counter-arguments. They swore by spontaneous levitations, unexplainable jerks, and tables that danced across marble floors as if possessed by unseen orchestras. In fact, during a London séance in 1860, a 3-legged walnut table reportedly hopped across the room toward a portrait of Queen Elizabeth. Was it a message? Or just a well-timed shove? Here's a delightful little fringe tidbit. Some mediums insisted the tables didn't just move, they had personalities. One woman in Bath claimed her séance table was a temperamental creature, shy at first, but fond of poetry and drawn to ginger biscuits. Another in Philadelphia said her table only responded to German operas and the scent of lemon polish. In fancier circles, the affair became increasingly theatrical. Picture this: a heavily draped salon, gaslight dimmed to a flicker, guests whispering behind lace fans. The host, often a fashionable widow or eccentric aunt, introduces the evening's medium, always with a name like Madame Zelma or the Countess Dupont, and then invites guests to place their hands on the chosen table. The mood is reverent, if a bit performative. Then come the questions. Is there a spirit among us? Tap. Did you know someone here in life? Tap, tap. Would you like a biscuit? Silence. The tension builds. Every creak of the floorboards is a message. Every groan of the table is scrutinized. Someone swears they feel cold fingers brush their wrist. A candle gutters. A breath catches. Then, suddenly, the table jerks again just enough to make someone scream. And that's the whole point, isn't it? Whether or not there's a ghost in the room, the table makes it feel like there could be. It's part shared illusion, part psychological dance, part Victorian flair for the dramatic. No matter how skeptical you are, if you sit long enough, with the lights low and the mood right, even the most ordinary furniture begins to feel animate. There's also an oddly democratic quality to it. While seances with private mediums were expensive, a table-tipping evening could be thrown by anyone with a parlor and a sense of occasion. No special equipment needed, just nerves of steel and a table willing to rock with the moment. In one particularly well-documented case, a Yorkshire family held nightly table sessions for months, asking questions about lost pets, neighborhood gossip, and eventually the Napoleonic Wars. The table, apparently unimpressed with small talk, answered only to questions about farm tools and Shakespeare. This led the family to believe their ghost was a frustrated plowman with a literary streak. Of course, not everyone found the phenomenon amusing. Some clergymen declared it demonic. Others dismissed it as women's hysteria because of course they did. In one notorious case, a magistrate issued a formal complaint against a local widow, claiming the sounds from her table sessions disturbed his dog. And yet, the popularity endured. Even as skeptics poked holes in the movement and occasionally in the furniture, table tipping remained a fixture of Victorian entertainment. It was just spooky enough to be thrilling, just physical enough to seem real, and just mysterious enough to keep people talking, or whispering, or screaming. You glance back down at your own fingers resting lightly on the table. It hasn't moved in a while, but still it feels like it might. Like it's waiting for the right question, or the right nudge. After all, these tables were never just furniture. They were characters, performers, stage props in a nationwide drama that blurred the lines between grief and show business. And as you rise to leave the parlor, your shadow stretching behind you across the gaslit floor, you swear the table moves one last time, just a hair. Or maybe that was just your imagination. You wander deeper into the flickering gloom, the echoes of creaking table legs still fresh behind you. Past the lace-curtained doorway, through a narrow hallway lined with stern portraits and curious busts, you find another chamber, and this one is darker still. The curtains are drawn completely, heavy velvet, in morning black. The air feels thick, as if even the dust motes are holding their breath. This, you realize, is the spirit cabinet room. Now, if table tipping was the warm-up act, spirit cabinets were the headliner. Think of them as the magician's trunk of spiritualism. A mysterious box, often human-sized, sometimes with slits or panels, designed to separate the medium from the physical world and allow the dead to come through. On paper, that's the idea. In reality, it's a Victorian stage trick wrapped in mysticism and just enough plausible spookiness to make your aunt wet her corset. The cabinets were most commonly used during what were called materialization seances, where a spirit was expected not just to speak or knock, but to physically appear, veil, shroud, and all. These events were dimly lit, often noisy, and highly theatrical. The medium would enter the cabinet, be tied up or closed in, and then after some dramatic silence, a disembodied hand would emerge from the darkness to stroke someone's cheek or pluck a lily from a side table. And yes, Victorians love that. Your hand brushes the side of an old wardrobe-looking structure shoved in the corner. It's just a box, really. Plain wood. A curtain. A stool inside. But in its heyday, this thing wasn't just furniture, it was a cosmic gateway. Or, depending on your perspective, the best hiding place for a medium's assistant to don a ghostly wig and gloves. Historians still argue whether spirit cabinets were ever used sincerely, or if they were always tools for stagecraft disguised as belief. There are certainly cases where the audience, often emotionally raw from recent loss, desperately wanted to believe. And in a room heavy with grief and dark velvet, even a fake hand emerging from the gloom could feel real enough to provoke tears. It was the show that mattered, and the furniture was essential to pulling it off. You step back as if the curtain might twitch, but it doesn't. Not yet. One of the most notorious mediums associated with spirit cabinets was Florence Cook. In the early 1870s, Cook gained fame and considerable money by conjuring the full-bodied spirit of a woman named Katie King. Audiences swore they saw her emerge from the cabinet, glowing and translucent, interacting gently with attendees before vanishing back into the veil. But here's the twist. When caught unawares during a séance, Florence was once found standing outside the cabinet wearing the exact same robes as Katie, face flushed, trying to explain why the spirit had borrowed her corset. Scandalous. And yet some still defended her. The cabinet, after all, was mysterious. Maybe it transfigured her. Maybe spirits needed to borrow a host body. Or maybe Florence had a gift for performance and a very loyal tailor. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some cabinets were wired with primitive sound devices, like rubber tubes or hidden bells, triggered by breath or pressure. These would emit faint moans, whistles, or knocks. Others had false backs for assistants to slip through. One particularly theatrical medium even installed a spring-loaded ghost launcher, because if you're going to fake ectoplasm, you might as well go all in. Mediums were sometimes tied to chairs inside the cabinets to prove they weren't sneaking around. But let's be honest, Victorian knots weren't exactly Houdini-proof. And many times, those very ropes were found neatly coiled at the medium's feet by séance end, spirits apparently having untied them with gentlemanly politeness. Still, the drama worked. These cabinets weren't just boxes. They were thresholds. When the curtains stirred, when a gauzy arm reached out into the candlelight, you didn't need to believe it believed for you. That's the trick. You didn't see a woman in gauze. You saw your mother, or your brother, or the child who hadn't made it through the last flu season. The furniture gave shape to grief and permission to pretend, even if just for a flickering moment. But the success of these cabinets also drew suspicion. Enter the Spirit Cabinet Exposers, a ragtag alliance of scientists, amateur magicians, and famously skeptical mustaches. Foremost among them was Harry Houdini, who made it a personal crusade to debunk fake mediums. He attended séances in disguise, snuck tools into his pockets, and frequently revealed the tricks before the medium could even begin. One of Houdini's favorite tactics was to offer to tie the medium himself, using professional escapology knots. Unsurprisingly, the spirits rarely appeared on those nights. They're shy. The medium might whisper. Or the energy's wrong. Or just maybe they needed that loosened rope to fish out the rubber ghost hand from their bustle. Still, Houdini wasn't universally loved. Many believers considered his efforts cruel, even blasphemous. After all, who was he to judge another person's grief performance? And isn't theater still truth if the audience needs it to be? The question lingers. You brush back the curtain of the cabinet gently, half expecting something to reach out and grab you. Nothing does. But the darkness inside is a different kind of black. Thick. Expectant. As if it remembers something you've forgotten. Imagine this room in its prime, candles flickering, the scent of ozone and rose water, the hush of anticipation before the curtain parts. It wasn't just a séance. It was a ceremony, a longing draped in shadow, a ritual for those who wanted to believe that death didn't quite mean goodbye. Even now, the cabinet stands like a mute sentinel, not a tool of deception, not quite, but a performer in its own right. It's not the medium who speaks here. It's the silence between breaths. The creak of wood, the whisper of a curtain parting just enough to see nothing. Or something. Or someone who looks like someone you used to love. You let the curtain fall. It sways, just for a moment. Then stills. You shuffle away from the spirit cabinet, the air behind you still slightly cooler, as if the box had its own private draft. A glance over your shoulder confirms it hasn't moved. Still, you quicken your pace just in case. Now, through another door. This one opens to what looks like an ordinary sitting room, though it hums with the residual energy of very extraordinary evenings. Gilded picture frames lean slightly on floral wallpaper. A grandfather clock ticks faintly, out of sync with itself. And on a low table near the hearth, there sits the most unlikely star of Victorian spiritualism, a trumpet. Yes, a trumpet. Not the kind belted out in a jazz club. Not a polished brass showpiece from a marching band. This is a séance trumpet typically made of lightweight aluminum, often collapsible, sometimes painted with stars or mystical symbols. At first glance, it resembles something you'd toss in the corner of a magician's attic. But in the séance world, it was the microphone of the beyond. You sit near it now, as guests once did, waiting for the direct voice phenomenon to begin. This was the next evolution in spirit performance. While table tipping and cabinets relied on movement and apparition, the séance trumpet introduced a new level of theatrical intimacy, sound. Real, eerie, often hilariously high-pitched voices believed to come directly from the dead. The way it worked allegedly was simple. The medium would slip into trance, the trumpet would float midair, a detail always conveniently happening in near-total darkness, and then a thin, often squeaky voice would emerge from the device. It might call someone's name, recite a message, or sometimes just sigh mournfully like a ghost in a melodrama. The effect could be spine-chilling or giggle-inducing, depending on your level of belief and how much sherry you'd had beforehand. You lean forward, just a little. The trumpet's wide end stares at you like a lazy cyclops. Nothing emerges. Not yet. Mainstream spiritualist circles were torn on the trumpet phenomenon. Some hailed it as a breakthrough. The spirits didn't need a body to speak, just a megaphone. Others were a little more cautious. After all, these were devices easily manipulated, lightweight enough to be propped by a rod, or swung on wires, or even tossed by foot in the dark. Historians still argue whether some mediums believed their voices were genuinely channeled, or if it was always ventriloquism hidden behind dim candlelight and heavy velvet drapes. But one thing is clear, the séance trumpet became wildly popular in both Europe and America. And when it came to equipment, mediums weren't afraid to get elaborate. Take Etta Wright, an American medium whose trumpet séances drew crowds in the early 1900s. Her clients claimed the trumpet not only floated, it changed color, emitted cool breezes, and once even produced the scent of lilacs. Etta herself denied any trickery, saying she had no idea how the phenomena worked. She simply allowed it. Meanwhile, skeptics attending her sessions noted that she coughed suspiciously into the trumpet just before the spirits spoke. But here's your quirky tidbit for the night. One séance in Boston claimed a spirit used the trumpet to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy entirely off-key. No message, no mystery, just spectral patriotism, badly performed. The medium blamed it on a child spirit, still learning proper vocal control. Others blamed it on a bored assistant hiding under the table with a kazoo. And yet, people kept showing up. Why? Because voice is intimate. Voice is real. You can fake movement, even fake an apparition, but the sound of someone calling your name from the veil? That's something else. It hits the gut. And in a world still reeling from epidemics and industrial disasters, people were desperate to hear their loved ones just one more time, even if it meant crowding into a candlelit room and listening to a tin funnel mutter nonsense in a falsetto. One especially well-documented session involved a grieving mother who swore she heard her child's voice from the trumpet, calling her mama and telling her he was safe. Later investigation revealed the medium had intercepted a letter she'd written to the spirits, read it, and practiced the child's lines beforehand. Cruel? Certainly. But the woman claimed it gave her peace. Did that matter more? You pick up the trumpet gently. It's lighter than you expected. Cold metal, faintly dented. Maybe it really did fly once. Or maybe it just rolled under a table and everyone decided to believe it was levitating. Either way, you raise it slightly, curious what the acoustics might do to your own voice. You whisper hello into the wide end. The sound comes back distorted. Hollow, like someone answering from the bottom of a well. The Victorians weren't content with just one trumpet, either. Advanced séances sometimes used multiple trumpets placed around the room, with voices darting between them like stereo spirits. The effect was meant to suggest multiple entities in attendance, chattering like tipsy ghosts at a cocktail party. One spiritualist proudly claimed to have hosted a séance where no fewer than 6 trumpets spoke simultaneously, though one mostly said, "Whoa," and crashed into the fireplace. There were also glowing trumpet variants. Painted with phosphorescent dye, these trumpets would leave light trails in the dark as they moved, making them appear even more otherworldly. The fact that some séance attendees brought butterfly nets, just in case, says more about Victorian expectations than any academic treatise could. Still, not everyone was enchanted. A particularly vocal newspaper columnist once wrote, "If the dead truly have messages for us, I doubt they'd choose to shout them through an aluminum cone in the middle of a parlor covered in antimacassars." Harsh but not inaccurate. You set the trumpet back down. It wobbles slightly, then stills. The room settles with it. It's odd, isn't it? All this effort. The curtains, the props, the illusion. And for what? A chance to believe? A stage to grieve? Or maybe just an excuse to do something strange in the company of strangers? These trumpets, these talking cones, were never just gimmicks. They were promises. That even in silence, something might speak. That death wasn't mute, it was muffled. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear it whisper. And so you do. You close your eyes, tilt your ear toward the trumpet, and for just a second you think you hear something. But it's probably just the wind. You leave the trumpet room behind, its echoes still whispering faintly in your ears. Down another hallway, the wallpaper patterns begin to distort in the low light, florals stretching into faces, vine tendrils curling like fingers. Or maybe you're just tired. Maybe this is what happens when you let yourself follow furniture through grief. But here's a door slightly ajar, and behind it lies something altogether different. No heavy curtains, no velvet, no gloomy candlelight, just crisp white linen, open windows, and a perfectly made bed. Odd, right? Until you spot the small table beside it, flanked by 2 identical chairs, and the strange circular frame hovering above the surface like a miniature chandelier, but upside down. This isn't a bedroom. It's a séance parlor. More specifically, the kind meant for automatic writing. Now, if spirit cabinets were for spectacle and trumpets for performance, then automatic writing was the quiet introvert of the spiritualist toolbox. No levitation, no singing ghosts, just pen, paper, and a human hand allegedly hijacked by the beyond. You sit in one of the chairs. The cushion sighs under you. The writing table's surface is smooth, faintly ink-stained. A thick fountain pen rests beside an open notebook, its pages blank, expectant, and next to it, curiously, a planchette. Not the Ouija kind, not quite. This one's different. It's wooden, heart-shaped, and mounted on tiny brass wheels. There's a small hole for a pencil to fit through the center. When pushed lightly across paper, it leaves scribbles. And according to many Victorians, those scribbles weren't yours. They belonged to someone else. Perhaps someone no longer living. Automatic writing was seen as a more refined, intellectual form of spirit communication. Less theater, more theology. Mediums, often women, often middle-class, would sit in trance, hands lightly resting on the planchette or loosely holding a pen. Then, slowly, their fingers would begin to twitch. The pen would jerk. Loops formed. Words. Sentences. Sometimes entire paragraphs. And when the medium woke up, she would deny authorship. Not me, she'd insist. It was him. Or her. Or them. The messages varied. Some were poetic. Others nonsensical. One medium allegedly wrote 40 pages of advice from Julius Caesar, most of which boiled down to eat more lentils and avoid daggers. Another claimed her messages were dictated by a spirit named Zerelda the Wise, who frequently misspelled wisdom. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Automatic writing became a staple in the movement known as Theosophy, which fused spiritualism with Eastern mysticism and esoteric Christian thought. Founded in 1875, the Theosophical Society treated automatic writings as sacred texts, messages not just from the dead, but from ascended masters who offered enlightenment from other dimensions. The most famous theosophist, Helena Blavatsky, published thousands of pages allegedly dictated by spiritual entities. Her writing was dense, mystical, and so convoluted that even devoted readers sometimes admitted they weren't entirely sure what it all meant, but it felt important. Your quirky tidbit for tonight. One British gentleman claimed to have received architectural blueprints for a new kind of energy-efficient house entirely through automatic writing. He built the house. It promptly flooded. Twice. When asked why he trusted ghostly architects, he said, "Spirits have no need for plumbing." Of course, not all practitioners claimed to channel ghosts. Some believed automatic writing tapped into the subconscious mind, a place where secrets, traumas, and latent creativity lay hidden. Sigmund Freud dabbled in similar ideas, though he was less interested in spirits and more in unresolved daddy issues. Historians still argue whether automatic writing is a genuine paranormal phenomenon, a psychological tool, or just what happens when a bored Victorian closes her eyes and lets her wrist go limp. But what's undeniable is this. The process feels like something is happening. You decide to try, just briefly. You place your hand on the planchette. It's smooth and warm from the air. Your fingers rest lightly. No pressure, no direction, just allowing. Nothing at first. Then, a twitch. The planchette nudges forward. A slow arc. You lift your hand. It's just a curve, like a half moon. But still, you suddenly understand the appeal. Not because you believe you've contacted Uncle Harold from the other side, but because, for a moment, the movement wasn't yours. It's a compelling illusion, one that invites you to ask, if I didn't consciously guide that line, who or what did? Now, remember the writing circle above the table? That's not just decor. It's part of a spiritualist tool known as a psychography device, meant to guide the medium's hand within specific boundaries. Think of it like bumpers on a bowling lane, except you're bowling with your unconscious. Some groups took this even further, placing the planchette on large scrolls of paper spread across the floor, encouraging the medium to walk while scribbling, sometimes producing vast looping texts said to be cosmic diagrams or soul maps. They mostly looked like spilled spaghetti. Still, the process was deeply personal, private, not the raucous spectacle of a levitating trumpet, but something introspective, therapeutic, even comforting. You're not just writing nonsense, you're letting go. And for the recently bereaved, that meant everything. You flip through the notebook on the table. Some of the pages are filled with tight, crabbed script. Others bear only single words. Forgive. Wait. Hunger. A few pages contain what looks like music. One, curiously, just says, "Tell Mildred no." Whether any of it was real or not didn't always matter. As with all things in the Victorian seance world, belief wasn't the point. Permission was. Permission to mourn, to pretend, to imagine, to heal. You set the planchette back down. It slides slightly, then rests. Through the window, a breeze moves the curtains, and for a moment you could swear the planchette trembles. But no, that's just your breath. Probably. Your fingers still hum faintly from the trace movement of the planchette as you stand and stretch. You're getting used to these objects that blur the line between prop and portal. The Victorians weren't content with just feeling something. They needed to furnish it. And so, of course, there were even chairs for communing with the dead. The next room you step into is filled with them. Not arranged in a circle, not waiting for a tea party. No, these chairs face a single, imposing centerpiece, a carved wooden stand with padded arms and a peculiar headrest at the top. Something between a confessional and a dentist's chair. You approach slowly. This, you realize, is a trance chair. Unlike the average drawing room seating, trance chairs were engineered often custom-built to support mediums during long, exhausting episodes of deep spiritual communication. Think Lazy Boy, but metaphysical. If you were going to host disembodied entities for hours on end, you needed proper lumbar support. Even ghosts had standards. You settle into one of the simpler chairs nearby, eyeing the trance chair like it might sit up on its own. Its leather is cracked. The armrests are dark with age and touch. This one has faint carvings along its legs, tiny spirals, probably decorative, possibly protective. It wouldn't be the only one. You see, many trance chairs were fitted with charms, sigils, even concealed iron nails believed to ward off malicious spirits. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about boundary. The chair helped anchor the medium's body while their mind wandered the astral backstage. And everyone else? Well, they watched and hoped the journey didn't get too weird. Mainstream history tip. Trance mediumship was one of the most highly regarded forms of spiritualist performance. It involved entering an altered state, sometimes fully unconscious, sometimes semi-lucid through which the medium became a channel for spirit voices, messages, even behaviors. Not unlike a sleepwalker who insists they're hosting Benjamin Franklin for dinner. One of the most celebrated trance mediums was Emma Hardinge Britten, a founding figure of modern spiritualism. Her séances were calm, dignified, and oddly academic. She delivered entire lectures from the spirit of Socrates, arguing about ethics and occasionally misquoting Plato. Audiences adored her. Whether you believed her or not, you couldn't deny she had presence. Then there was Leonora Piper, the Boston medium whose trances were so deep she had to be gently roused with smelling salts. Under trance, she would speak in different voices, one of which, a cheeky personality named George Pelham, claimed to be a dead lawyer with a love for gossip and Latin phrases. And you know what? The sitters loved George. He was like their celestial bartender. Your quirky tidbit for tonight. One medium's trance guide was a talking dog, named Ruff, who gave spiritual advice in rhymed couplets. No, really. According to Seance notes, Ruff's messages included gems like, "Chase not ghosts where logic fails, lest you trip on spectral tales." It's unclear whether Ruff was meant to be metaphorical or just an unusually literate spaniel. Still, the trance chair had a serious function. It physically grounded the medium, especially when things got turbulent. There were stories of mediums leaping mid-session, convulsing, or falling limp. The chair helped maintain the illusion of control. But that's where the debate begins. Historians still argue whether trance states were genuine altered consciousness, carefully rehearsed performances, or symptoms of dissociation common in Victorian women under extreme social pressure. Remember, many mediums were young women who had limited autonomy in other areas of life. But in a séance, they were commanders of the veil. They could speak with authority, even argue with ghosts. That's a power few were afforded elsewhere. And trance wasn't limited to speech. Some mediums performed trance art, sketching rapidly while entranced, producing fantastical portraits of spirit beings or astral landscapes. Others sang. One woman reportedly played piano with her eyes closed while channeling a composer named Miss Devon, who critics said sounded suspiciously like Chopin with a hangover. You rise now, drawn to a second, smaller chair across the room. This one is peculiar. It has no legs. A sort of curved rocking base supports the seat, and it's mounted on a track like a child's hobby horse. This is a spirit movement chair, used to demonstrate involuntary action. The idea was simple. The sitter would rest in the chair, relax completely, and let the spirits move them. Sometimes they swayed gently. Other times the chair jerked violently, sliding along its track like it had somewhere urgent to be. One documented séance claimed the spirit of a 12th century monk used the chair to rock himself into our dimension. The medium said the motion helped him remember how to be alive. A noble sentiment, though it's hard to picture a medieval monk requesting a rocking chair séance. Still, the Victorians were obsessed with proof. Movement, sound, voice, writing. But trance was special. It felt authentic. When someone's voice changed, when their posture shifted, when they forgot who they were, you didn't just witness a performance, you witnessed a transformation. It was unnerving and a little addictive. Even skeptics found themselves drawn in. There's something oddly tender about a woman in a trance speaking with her dead sister's voice, weeping as she offers apologies for fights neither of them remembered. Whether she believed it or simply needed to, the result was the same: catharsis. You sit once more in the big trance chair. The cushions resist you at first, then sigh. You let your hands rest on the padded arms. Close your eyes. You don't expect anything. You just want to know what it felt like. A breeze through the half-open door. The faint creak of old upholstery. And for one brief, strange moment you forget what day it is. You open your eyes. The room is the same. But now, you notice a small bell on the table beside the chair. Just a little handbell. Probably used to signal the start or end of trance. You pick it up. It's cool. Ornate. Delicately engraved with tiny ivy leaves. You ring it once. The sound is soft. Pleasant. Like a pause. Or a beginning. The bell's fading chime still dances in your ears as you leave the trance chair behind, the fabric wrinkled faintly in your wake like the echo of a vanished sitter. By now, You're growing fluent in this strange language, half furniture, half faith, all deeply Victorian. You've seen cabinets and trumpets, planchettes and posture chairs. But tonight's next curiosity? It hums with mischief. You push open a narrow wooden door, low-ceilinged and smoky with dust. Inside, it's dim and compact, almost closet-like, and in the middle stands what looks suspiciously like a puppet theater. Tiny curtains, a boxy frame, a covered lower panel that conceals the operator's legs. Except this isn't a child's toy. It's a spirit cabinet, but a particular type. A portable one. And what it lacks in glamour, it more than makes up for in drama. The spirit cabinet is where theatrical spiritualism reached its full, illusionist glory. Think séance meets stagecraft, with a touch of Houdini and a generous helping of candle smoke. This miniature version was built for travel, lightweight, foldable, and easy to set up in drawing rooms, rented parlors, or dusty traveling tents. Mediums who couldn't afford a fixed séance space lugged these cabinets around like circus acts, setting up shop for the grieving and curious alike. And once inside, oh, the possibilities. Here's your mainstream fact. Spirit cabinets became famous thanks to the Davenport brothers, an American duo who toured the US and Europe in the mid-19th century. Their cabinet act involved being tied inside, doors closed, and then, through mysterious ghostly intervention, instruments would play, knots would untie, and messages would appear. They weren't the first, but they popularized the form. A kind of paranormal vaudeville. Of course, it wasn't long before others copied the format and improved it. Victorian spiritualists made their cabinets more elaborate, more finely tuned, and more manipulative. Some added trapdoors. Others included built-in shelves that dropped at a touch, releasing tambourines or glowing handkerchiefs with precise timing. You crouch to inspect the base of this cabinet. There's a false panel near the floor, slightly ajar. You tug gently. A hidden compartment. And inside, a length of black silk. A sliver of phosphorescent paint. A brass harmonica. Just enough for a convincing midnight miracle. Mediums would often paint their hands or faces with faintly glowing powder, spirit phosphor, to simulate ghostly forms. When the curtains twitched, a luminous hand might float out. It was thrilling. It was spooky. It was usually sewn onto a stick. Still, people believed. Or, more accurately, people wanted to believe. Your quirky tidbit. In 1874, a traveling medium named Professor Whitefeather used a cabinet rigged with thin wires that activated bells, chimes, and even released confetti. He billed his act as a wedding reception from the spirit world. It was shut down when the ghostly bride, allegedly the spirit of Anne Boleyn, accidentally flung her veil into a guest's lap. The veil turned out to be part of Whitefeather's mother's old curtains. And yet, even skeptics stayed for the show. The line between deception and devotion was blurry. For many Victorians, it didn't matter if the tricks were exposed. What mattered was the emotional journey. If a flickering tambourine in a velvet-draped box made someone feel close to their lost child, who were you to pull back the curtain? Still, not everyone appreciated the ambiguity. Magicians like Harry Houdini dedicated themselves to exposing fraudulent mediums. Houdini himself recreated cabinet tricks in public lectures, showing how knotted ropes could be slipped in seconds, how ghostly knocks could be made with hidden toe bells. He even attended séances in disguise, once pretending to be a mourning widow named Madame Nussbaum, just to catch a cabinet fraud red-handed. Historians still argue whether the cabinet was more performance than belief, or whether the line even matters. Some mediums may have started with honest intent, only to resort to tricks when the spirits stayed stubbornly silent. Others might have believed that a little theatrical nudge helped prime the energy, or as one medium put it, invited the ghosts to get on with it. Back in the cabinet room, you peer behind the miniature curtains. The inner walls are lined with soft black velvet, dull with age. It absorbs light. It hides movement. It also muffles sound, making the faintest whisper seem deeper, more disembodied. You close the cabinet doors gently. For a moment, silence wraps the room like a second skin. Then the unmistakable clang of a tambourine. You spin around. Nothing. You step back to the cabinet and open it again. There, nestled in the folds of fabric, a dented tambourine, its brass jingles still trembling. Probably just settled from your earlier movement, but still it pulses with possibility. You pick it up. It's heavier than you expected. The metal is cold. You give it a tiny shake. A shy, shimmering jingle. You imagine it echoing in the dark, followed by a hushed voice. "I'm here." You set it down. Cabinets like this weren't only for performances, they were also used for spirit photography setups. Early photographers would use the enclosed space to control lighting and double exposure. With the right conditions, you could produce an image of a sitter with a ghostly figure standing behind them, half transparent, arms outstretched. Often, these were cut and pasted photos of real people, relatives, actors, or random strangers from newspaper clippings. The sitter's reaction? Often tears, sometimes laughter, and occasionally terror. One woman fainted during a séance photograph when the ghostly figure turned out to be her husband, not dead, as she believed, but simply relocated to another city with someone named Francesca. The camera exposed not just ghosts, but inconvenient truths. You step out of the cabinet room, close the door behind you, and for a brief moment, the tambourine rings again. This time, without touch. Or so it seems. You leave the tambourine behind, though its echo lingers like a dream half remembered. Your steps now carry you down a narrow corridor lit by flickering lanterns, some of them real, others illusions cast by carefully placed mirrors. You can't help but glance over your shoulder once, just in case. Ahead, the space opens up into a long rectangular hall. A drawing room, of sorts, but it's no ordinary parlor. This one is arranged like a theater. Chairs placed in neat rows, facing a modest platform. And on that stage, a single table. Nothing else. Just a round, polished table made of dark oak, covered by a thick velvet cloth. No tools. No props. No cabinets. Just silence. This is where you witness the most stripped-down séance ritual of all, table turning. You approach the edge of the stage. Imagine yourself seated with others' hands outstretched, fingers barely resting on the table's edge, like a group about to play an extremely tense board game. No planchettes, no bells, just anticipation. And knuckles. Table turning was an early and wildly popular form of séance, especially during the 1850s. Your mainstream history nugget. It began in the wake of the Fox sisters' fame in America and spread rapidly across Europe. In salons from Paris to Edinburgh, people gathered to try it. Even Queen Victoria reportedly dabbled. Though, granted, so did half her court. Here's how it worked. You and your séance mates placed your hands lightly on the table and waited. Slowly, sometimes very slowly, the table would begin to tilt. Just a little, then more. Then it might rock back and forth. Sometimes it spun. The spirits, they said, were communicating through motion. To talk, with the beyond, you assign meanings. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. A clockwise turn to indicate agreement. A lurch backward to express disapproval. The table became a Ouija board with legs. And sometimes, it leapt. Some accounts describe small tables rising off the floor entirely, twisting midair, even chasing guests around the room. Whether this was spiritual enthusiasm or a particularly spirited prankster in the group, well, that's where things get interesting. Historians still argue whether these movements were unconscious, caused by the ideomotor effect, that same gentle, involuntary muscle motion behind dowsing rods and Ouija boards, or if they were, in fact, outright fraud. Because in at least a few cases, observers noticed suspicious feet nudging table legs, or strings, conveniently forgotten beneath the cloth. You reach out and touch the table now. It's cool, solid. The wood is polished from countless hands, countless nights of curiosity and grief. You place your fingertips gently on its surface. Nothing happens, of course. But maybe that's the point. The beauty of table turning was in its communal quality. No lone medium with theatrical flair. No dramatic trance states. Just people, sitting together, focused on one thing. Hoping, mourning, asking, and sometimes laughing. Your quirky tidbit. In 1853, a French nobleman hosted a lavish table-turning soiree that ended in chaos when the table insisted one of the guests was already dead. Said guest was very much alive and very insulted. The séance ended with red wine spilled on velvet and someone being slapped with a glove. But even amid scandal, the practice spread. There were instruction manuals. Popular magazines offered tips. Use 3-legged tables for best movement, avoid carpets that could interfere with motion, and always dim the lights just enough to make things feel mysterious. One early proponent of the method was Allan Kardec. who took it further and systematized what he called spirit dictation. Instead of just yes/no answers, participants would ask questions and let the table tap out full alphabetic responses. Slowly, very, very slowly, a séance could last hours as spirits spelled out long-winded Victorian advice like, seek modesty and abstain from claret after dusk. You wander off the stage now, toward a side alcove where an experimental version of the practice is displayed. Here, a table is rigged with an early automatic recording device, a system of levers and inked rollers meant to document table movement as empirical data. Spiritualists believed that this would finally prove that the motion wasn't coming from the sitters. Spoiler alert, it still looked suspiciously like the sitters. But the desire for proof was genuine. These weren't all charlatans and showmen. Many participants were educated, sincere, even deeply skeptical people. They just wanted something more. Some explanation. Some assurance that death wasn't a locked door, but a revolving one. And yet, even skeptics found the sessions compelling. In low light, among hushed voices, with the table trembling ever so slightly beneath your fingers, it was easy to forget the rules of logic. It was easier to believe, or at least feel like you were close. There was, of course, a backlash. Religious authorities often warned against table turning as a dangerous distraction or worse, a flirtation with demonic forces. Newspapers mocked the trend, lampooning it as upper-class nonsense. One cartoon depicted a séance gone wrong. A group of foppish men knocked unconscious by a table possessed by the ghost of a disgruntled furniture maker. The caption? "O ye faithful." Still, the movement persisted. Some tables were even manufactured specifically for spiritualist use with smoother joints, lighter wood, and elegant carvings meant to invite more refined spirits. Because apparently even ghosts have aesthetic preferences. You run your hand over one such table, now it's surface-worn, but lovingly detailed. A vine of carved ivy twists around the edge, curling toward the center like a secret path. Underneath, someone scratched initials. Just a pair of them. And a year. No story. No message. Just a name and a date. You step back. Let the silence rise. The table doesn't move. Not yet. But it feels like it might. You leave the drawing room of the whirling tables behind, still half expecting to hear the scrape of a wooden leg trailing behind you. The corridors narrow again, becoming almost too tight to walk comfortably. Dust dances in the low lantern light, and somewhere, a floorboard groans with theatrical timing. But when you round the next bend, the space opens unexpectedly into what looks like a study. Warm, amber light. Shelves of leather-bound books with titles like The Arc of Consciousness and Transmissions Beyond the Veil. There's a faint smell of lavender oil, or maybe it's just wishful thinking. And in the center, a writing desk. Wide, ornate, carved edges, inlaid with faint mother-of-pearl that gleams even in shadow. Its surface is covered with paper, some half-written, others blank. Beside it lies a simple pen and inkwell. You've arrived at a séance ritual that feels more intimate than the table dances and trumpet flares. Here, the medium becomes a messenger. Silent, scribbling, often unsure what they're writing until it's too late. Welcome to automatic writing. Imagine sitting down, taking a deep breath, and allowing your hand to drift, pen trembling lightly in your grip. You don't think. You don't plan. You just let your hand move, driven, supposedly, by a spirit eager to pass on knowledge, warnings, or poems. Occasionally quite bad poems. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Automatic writing became popular during the spiritualism wave of the late 19th century, especially with the rise of the Society for Psychical Research in England. It was considered less performative and more scientifically respectable than table turning or trumpet seances. Prominent figures including philosopher William James attended or conducted sessions with practitioners who produced astonishing, often elaborate writings in languages they allegedly didn't know. Latin, ancient Greek, the odd sprinkling of Egyptian hieroglyphs, usually drawn sideways. You sit at the desk now and pick up a yellowed sheet. The ink has bled slightly into the parchment. The handwriting starts neat copperplate, elegant. But a few lines in, it changes, becomes jagged, spidery. Thinadly flips upside down and trails off the page. The author? Unknown. The message? Unfinished. Automatic writing was often performed in a trance state. Mediums would breathe deeply, sometimes chant or whisper prayers, and then open themselves to possession, though not in the horror movie sense. More like letting their conscious mind step aside, so something else could slip in. That something else often had strong opinions. Many mediums claim to be conduits for ascended masters, spirits from ancient civilizations, or deceased family members with urgent advice. And sometimes, just odd characters. Your quirky tidbit. In 1906, a medium in Yorkshire claimed to channel the spirit of a long-dead Egyptian priest named Rahatep. For nearly a year, she wrote messages about pyramid construction, celestial geometry, and recipes for a sun wine, made from fermented fig bark. Her followers tried to make it. The result sent 3 of them to hospital and gave the town a new rule: never drink ghost wine. Still, automatic writing fascinated the public. It felt more subtle than a voice in the air or a trumpet floating mid-room. More human, more intimate. If the words were real, they came directly from the hand of the departed. And if they weren't, well, at least they made for compelling reading. You slide open the drawer of the writing desk. Inside, more papers. Dozens. Each one covered in layered, looping handwriting. Some are densely packed paragraphs. Others just single lines repeated again and again. It is not finished. It is not finished. Some pages are signed. Others aren't. And some carry names you recognize. E.K.B.H., the Countess. One is simply signed, Mother. Historians still argue whether automatic writing is an unconscious psychological process, a mild dissociative state, or genuine spiritual communication. The ideomotor theory makes another appearance here. Suggests that your hand might move without conscious intent, shaped by your deep memories or expectations. But here's where it gets stranger. Some mediums produced writings in completely different handwriting styles: neat cursive when awake, wild scrawl in trance. Some used their non-dominant hand. Others wrote backward mirror script that could only be read by holding it up to glass. This eerie fluency still puzzles researchers today. In fact, certain psychologists used automatic writing as a tool for studying dissociative identity, long before anyone used terms like multiple personalities. And some even theorized it was a form of creative unlocking, a bit like dreaming out loud onto paper. You pick up another sheet. This one's different. The handwriting is soft, loose, like someone unsure of the pen. It says only, "I miss the lilacs." You don't know who wrote it, or who they meant, but somehow the message lands. Many Victorians believed that spirits retained their emotions: longing, regret, even affection. They weren't just cold, drifting consciousness. They were still them, still people. The dead wrote letters through the living, and often they said exactly what the living needed to hear. Of course, there were rules. Mediums were advised never to read their writings aloud, while still entranced spirits didn't like it. Some refused to answer questions until they'd written uninterrupted. Others claimed certain ghosts became jealous if you called on a different one too often. "Ask Uncle Tobias one more time," one spirit allegedly warned, "and I'll leave ink in your tea." There's a charm to the absurdity, but also a tenderness. Automatic writing wasn't just parlor entertainment, it was grief put to paper. It was sitting quietly, in hope that your hand would move and anyone would reach back. You fold the letter gently and return it to the drawer. Then, just for a moment, you sit at the desk. You take the pen in hand. It's heavier than it looks. Balanced. You close your eyes and wait. And though your hand doesn't move, not quite it wants to, you rise from the writing desk slowly, letting the weight of all those half-written messages settle somewhere behind your ribcage. The scent of old ink and polished wood lingers as you step back into the hallway. This next part of the journey hums with a different kind of energy, quieter, yes, but charged all the same. You round another corner, and now the hallway opens into a space that looks more like a parlor crossed with a photography studio. A tall back chair sits beneath a draped black cloth. Heavy curtains blot out any trace of moonlight. There's a camera on a tripod, its bellows folded, its lens capped. Everything here is hushed, intentional, waiting. Welcome to the peculiar world of spirit photography. You sit in the chair without being asked. The moment you do, the atmosphere changes. You don't move, barely breathe. Across from you, a mannequin stands in place of a medium, dressed in 1890s morning black, complete with a veil. And behind her, just barely visibly, a framed photograph. You lean in. There's a woman in the photo. Early 40s, stern expression. She sits for her portrait like any Victorian might, hands in her lap, unsmiling. But behind her, just over her left shoulder, is a faint figure. Translucent. Wispy. A man in military uniform, his face etched with sorrow, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the camera's lens. And Yesh is a ghost. This is your mainstream historical fact. Spirit photography was introduced in the 1860s, just as post-Civil War grief reached its apex in the United States. The practice became hugely popular thanks to photographers like William H. Mumler, who accidentally, so he claimed, captured spectral figures in his studio portraits. He was eventually tried for fraud, though acquitted, and his work continued to circulate widely. Mumler's photos were compelling. Often, a soft white mist would hover beside the sitter. Sometimes full figures emerged: deceased spouses, lost children, departed soldiers. The ghosts were always quiet, always hovering protectively, and crucially, they always looked a little like they were made of cotton gauze and wishful thinking. Yet many believed. After all, wouldn't you? Imagine having only one blurry daguerreotype of someone you loved, and then seeing their face faint but familiar appear in a brand new photograph right next to you. The temptation to believe was immense. For many, it was healing, and for some, it was business. A quirky tidbit for you. In England, one photographer claimed he could summon spirits to sit for portraits, and even advertised special package deals: 1 guinea for a guaranteed ghost, half price if it only showed as a wisp. His most popular photo, however, featured the spirit of his own cat, perched nobly on the sitter's lap. To this day, historians debate whether the ghost cat was double exposed or just a very cooperative live feline. You study another photograph on the wall. This one's more elaborate. The sitter is surrounded by multiple spirit figures and entire chorus of the dead, reaching toward her with outstretched arms and vacant expressions. One appears to be holding a harp. Another hovers midair, looking directly at the lens. The photo is dated 1902. The caption reads, "Family reunion after the veil." You shiver. Of course, not all spirit photography was strictly photographic. Some séance circles, particularly in the later Victorian period, began using spirit painting, where mediums produced images allegedly guided by unseen hands. These paintings often featured ethereal faces, glowing orbs, or biblical-like visions. A few were sold as portraits of actual ghosts. One collection, belonging to medium Georgiana Houghton, was so surreal and colorful that modern viewers liken it to psychedelic abstraction. But she insisted every brushstroke came from the spirits. Historians still argue whether this kind of art was a subconscious release creativity breaking free through trance or a deliberate, if beautiful, act of showmanship. Either way, the line between performance and belief blurred further. You reach the back of the room now, where a faded curtain hangs across a doorway. You pull it aside gently and step into a photo darkroom, frozen in time. Red light glows. Sheets of photographic paper hang like ghost laundry. Trays of developer fluid rest in rows, long since dried. A notebook lies open on the counter, detailing exposure times, lens settings, and notes on spirit presence duration. You flip through the notebook. The handwriting shifts page to page, like the owner was channeling more than one voicer, just battling poor penmanship. Some entries are clinical. 11 seconds, faint blur, no discernible features. Others are poetic. She appeared again. Same veil. Same eyes. I dare not print it. In the margins, one name appears over and over again. Lillian. You set the notebook down. Take one more look around. The camera. The chemicals. The faces that shouldn't be there. One last photo catches your eye. It's tucked behind a stack of books. Smaller than the others. Unlabeled. It's a portrait of a boy maybe 10 years old. Sitting on a stool, hands folded in his lap. Beside him, the faint outline of another child. The second figure leans in, as if whispering a secret. Or maybe just listening. The boy's gaze is straight at the camera. And straight at you. You return the photo to its place, careful not to smudge the glass. Because belief is delicate. And sometimes, people just want proof that the love they gave in lost still lingers. Even if only in silver nitrate and a flicker of imagination. You exit the studio quietly. Outside, the hallway stretches on. And behind you, you swear you hear the click of a camera shutter. You walk a little slower now. The air ahead feels cooler, denser, as if even sound is being muffled. No creaky floorboards here. No flitting candlelight. Just a long, low-ceiling passage where the darkness doesn't press it waits. At the end of the corridor, a doorway yawns open into a salon of silence. It looks like it was once a sitting room, but now the furniture has been pushed back against the walls. A small stage has been assembled at the far end, just a foot or two off the ground. A thick velvet curtain frames the back, heavy enough to conceal something, or someone. This is the next odd corner of Victorian seance culture. The cabinet scenes a performance of control, restraint, and things that go bump from behind curtains. You take a seat, not on the floor, your back would never forgive you, but in one of the rickety wooden chairs that line the perimeter. The kind that wobbles slightly, just enough to make you doubt its commitment to holding you up. Around you, the imagined audience settles in too. A mix of believers, skeptics, and the always entertaining Victorian aunts who come for the spectacle and stay for the gossip. The cabinet seance was all about physical mediumship, not just channeling spirits, but producing physical phenomena, knocks, raps, floating objects, and most controversially ectoplasm. Yes, ectoplasm. That gooey, ghostly substance that supposedly oozed from the mouths, ears, and other less well-discussed orifices of entranced mediums. Your mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, cabinet seances had become the most theatrical and contested form of spiritualism. The cabinet, itself a curtained-off enclosure, was intended to shield the medium from distractions, but also served, conveniently, as a place where tricks could be more easily concealed. The practice was made famous by mediums like Florence Cook and Eusapia Palladino. Cook claimed to materialize a full spirit form named Katie King, who would step out of the cabinet and walk among the sitters. Katie wore flowing robes. She smelled like roses. She sometimes braided the hair of women in the audience, and she looked suspiciously like Florence Cook in a wig. Still, many found the experience deeply moving. You watch now as the velvet curtain trembles. Just a flicker, a breeze, perhaps, or a stagehand with cold feet. The seance begins not with words, but with a soft harmonic hum. The medium imagined here for you in vivid clarity sits inside the cabinet, hands and feet bound with white cotton strips. This, they say, prevents her from manipulating objects while in trance. The knots are checked by guests. One gentleman double knots, for good measure. It won't help. The room dims further. A bell on the table rings once in its own. A trumpet rises slowly into the air, hovering before spinning in a lazy spiral. And just as your eyes adjust to the dark, a luminous face appears between the curtains. Pale, blinking. It says nothing, just stares. It vanishes. This, according to the people in the room, is a materialized spirit. And now, the star of the show, ectoplasm. Your quirky tidbit brace yourself ectoplasm was described by some mediums as a living, intelligent substance that could take form on command. In reality, it was often cheesecloth soaked in egg whites, stuffed into the mouth or hidden under skirts and pulled forth with as much drama as the moment demanded. Some seances featured ectoplasm with facial features drawn in pencil. Others floated disembodied, hands attached to nothing at all. One seance reportedly ended when the spirit tripped over its own trailing ectoplasmic robes and swore loudly in a Liverpool accent. The spirit's name was quickly changed in the official notes from St. Michael to Colin. Of course, not everyone bought it. Historians still argue whether audiences truly believed in the spectacle or whether they suspended disbelief as part of a cultural ritual, half faith, half theater. The line between conviction and curiosity was never quite clear. Even serious minds were drawn in. Sir William Crookes, a leading scientist of the era, attended multiple seances with Florence Cook and insisted that Katie King was a genuine materialized spirit. His colleagues were less convinced. Rumors swirled. Some suggested Crookes had fallen under Florence's charm. Others accused him of scientific gullibility. Still, his endorsement lent an air of legitimacy that kept the cabinet seances thriving. You look to the side of the room now, where props are neatly arranged. Tambourines, trumpets, a slate for spirit writing, a small basket of fresh-cut flowers. These were often used as test objects. If a trumpet moved or a flower wilted midair, it was said to be the work of a passing spirit. You reach for the slate and turn it over. On the underside, faint writing emerges in chalk. Do not doubt what you cannot see. Well played, ghost. Some mediums required complete darkness for manifestations to occur. Others allowed for red light séances, where a dim red bulb let observers see without scaring off the spirits who, presumably, had an aversion to anything brighter than a Victorian gas lamp. Fraud was rampant, of course. Hidden wires, hinged furniture, trapdoors, sleight of hand. In one infamous case, a spirit's veil was pulled off mid-performance, revealing a very startled medium still wearing her corset and boots. Still, people came. Because despite the theatricality, the cheesecloth, and the off-brand ectoplasm, the hope was always real. You sit quietly now listening. The bell rings again, this time softer. And from inside the cabinet, a voice whispers not in your ears, but in your chest. You were never alone. It may have been a trick, or it may not. Either way, you rise and leave the cabinet room with slower steps. You don't look back at the stage. Some curtains are better left closed. The corridor beyond the cabinet room narrows slightly, and the walls grow closer, clad now in dark wallpaper embossed with strange, swirling motifs like tendrils, or perhaps roots, branching outward and upward. You run your hand along it. It's smooth and warm, like skin touched by candlelight. Then, just ahead, a door creaks open on its own. Of course it does. You step into a parlor that could only be described as overcommit to atmosphere. Thick velvet drapes, wall-to-wall rugs with so many overlapping patterns your eyes give up trying to process them. A dozen ornate chairs arranged in a circle, and in the center, an intricately carved planchette board, its letters faded but still readable. This, dear sleeper, is the world of talking boards and automatic writing, perhaps the most charmingly low-maintenance tools in the Victorian spiritualist's arsenal. And it all starts with a finger. You sit down and place your fingertips lightly on the heart-shaped wooden planchette, as they did over a century ago. No electricity, no flashing lights. Just you, the board, and whatever may or may not be lingering in the static between thoughts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The modern Ouija board was patented in 1891 by Elijah Bond and mass-marketed by the Kennard Novelty Company. It quickly became a parlor game sensation, especially among the middle and upper classes. And despite being sold alongside dominoes and checkers, it was believed by many to offer a direct line to the afterlife. The instructions were simple. Gather a few curious friends, dim the lights, rest your fingers lightly on the planchette, ask a question, and wait. Slowly, often imperceptibly at first, the planchette would begin to move. No one pushing it, just gliding. Or so it felt. The board spelled out names, dates, places, warnings, gossip, and, quite often, wildly inaccurate predictions about the end of the world, usually happening next Thursday. Even Mark Twain is rumored to have lampooned Ouija use in letters to friends, noting its knack for calling up spirits who were suspiciously illiterate. And yet it persisted. The planchette itself predates the full board, originally used for automatic writing tool with a pencil fixed into its body, so spirits could, in theory, write directly onto paper. It became so fashionable in the 1850s that some writing desks were made with built-in planchette drawers, as if penning letters to Aunt Mildred and the ghost of Napoleon required the same stationery. Your quirky tidbit. In 1871, a woman in Boston insisted she'd written an entire etiquette guide dictated to her by the ghost of Benjamin Franklin via automatic writing. Its advice? Always tip your servants. Never wear muddy shoes indoors. And avoid séances during thunderstorms because electricity confuses the spirits. Solid advice, honestly. You glance down now at the board in front of you. It's old, burnished, probably cherry wood. The letters are blackened with age, and the yes and no in the top corners seem to lean inward slightly, as if whispering. You ask, half sarcastically, "Is anyone here?" The planchette trembles. Just a little. Now, before you chalk this up to ghosts, let's drift a bit into science. The ideomotor effect, a term coined in the 1850s, refers to the phenomenon where small, unconscious movements are made in response to suggestion. Basically, your fingers move even when you think they're not. It's the same mechanism that makes dowsing rods twitch and pendulums swing in your hand when you're sure you're holding still. It's not fraud. It's the sneaky magic of your nervous system, blending anticipation with the muscle memory of belief. Historians still argue whether planchette sessions function more as spiritual communion or as a kind of psychological mirror, reflecting thoughts and emotions the participants didn't realize they were sharing. In many ways, the board told people exactly what they were afraid or desperate to hear. You now imagine a Victorian living room. Late evening, fire crackling. Two sisters lean over a planchette board. They ask about their deceased brother. The planchette spells out. Safe. Watching. Light. They cry. Were they deceived? Or were they comforted? There's power in symbols, after all. As you consider this, the light in the parlor shifts. The fireplace you hadn't noticed before flares briefly, casting strange shadows along the ceiling. The letters on the board seem to flicker. You blink. The board now reads, "Move on." Well then, time to explore the fringes. Some spiritualists took the idea of communication further, developing a practice called transdictation, where mediums would enter a deep altered state and speak messages from spirits in unknown languages or poetry. The most famous of these was Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, who claimed to be in contact with ancient Himalayan masters via spirit letters received in locked boxes. Naturally, one of her spirit guides had an uncanny interest in metaphysics, karma, and British tea customs. Scholars are still unsure which of those is most suspicious. Another outlier, spirit typewriting. In the early 1900s, a few mediums began using modified typewriters, claiming spirits would strike the keys while the medium sat in trance. Pages were filled with chaotic, sometimes unreadable prose, often interpreted through a healthy dose of imagination and hope. One alleged spirit manuscript consisted of 47 pages repeating the word love in increasingly messy capitals. And people framed it. You shake your head fondly. Humans. Always looking for signs. Always reaching. The parlor now grows dim again. The fire fades. The board sits still. Before you rise, you leave one finger lightly resting on the planchette. You ask softly, "Are you still there?" A pause. Then, "Always." You smile. Whether it's muscle memory or magic, who can say? You step quietly from the room, and behind you, the air shifts, just a little like breath on the back of your neck. Your footsteps now lead you into a colder part of the house, or perhaps it's just your imagination catching up. The carpet has given way to stone tiles, irregular and worn smooth in the center. You trace the route with your eyes before moving on, careful not to let your slippers squeak. Up ahead is a narrow room that looks like it hasn't hosted a séance in years, and yet every surface is still lined with the tools of divination. Shelves of mismatched glass jars, stacks of brittle books bound in cracked leather, and a wide table in the center cluttered with curious odds and ends. Welcome to the realm of spirit photography and ghost gadgets, where Victorian inventiveness collided headlong with spiritual longing, and sometimes with fraud elaborate enough to earn applause. A large black box sits on the table, bellows extended, lens open like a watching eye. You recognize it instantly. A Victorian-era camera, the kind that took ages to prepare and required absolute stillness to avoid blurred images. This one is different. Tucked into the frame are two photographs. The first is a stiff portrait of a family, mother, father, and 3 children. All serious faces. But behind the father's shoulder, a translucent figure looms, a woman in pale robes, slightly out of focus, her eyes half-lidded. Her hand rests on his arm. The second photograph is labeled, Mrs. Hannah Pitt, with her late husband, Arthur. You look closer. Arthur seems not altogether present. His body is faded. His edges are smoky. But there he is, peering over her shoulder like someone photobombing from the afterlife. This was the miracle of spirit photography, a trend born in the 1860s and carried well into the early 20th century. Your mainstream historical fact. The first known spirit photograph is attributed to William H. Mumler, a Boston photographer who, in 1861, took a self-portrait that appeared to include the ghostly image of his deceased cousin. The photograph made headlines, and Mumler quickly gained fame as someone able to capture the departed on film. His clients included grieving parents, widows, and even Mary Todd Lincoln, who sat for a photo that appeared to show Abraham Lincoln standing behind her, ghost-like and solemn. Of course, Mumler was eventually taken to court for fraud. Experts testified that the ghostly images could be produced using double exposé camera trick that involved reusing the same photographic plate to capture two images, creating the illusion of a translucent figure. The court couldn't prove he'd done it deliberately, though, and he was acquitted. But his reputation never fully recovered. Your quirky tidbit. Some spirit photographers used pre-prepared negatives that included stock images of ghosts, which would then appear superimposed on the client's photo. This led to a recurring problem, the same ghost showing up in multiple people's portraits. A widow in Leeds once stormed out of a studio after recognizing her late husband's spirit in a sample photo on the wall labeled as someone else's ghostly son. Oops. Historians still argue whether the appeal of spirit photography lay in the novelty of the technology or in its deeper emotional pull. Was it a way to process grief in an age when death came easily and often? Or was it a performance of mourning, with the photograph serving as both relic and reassurance? You imagine now a grieving mother clutching a silver-framed image of herself beside a ghost child, barely visible in the grain. To her, the image is real. It has to be. She shows it to friends, keeps it under her pillow. The camera, she says, can't lie. But of course it can. Even then, ghost gadgetry didn't stop with photos. Victorian spiritualists were endlessly inventive, eager to combine new technologies with old beliefs. Tuning forks were calibrated to spiritual frequencies. Spirit trumpets long, hollow tubes were used to amplify ghostly voices. Some were cleverly fitted with echo chambers to enhance the effect, creating an eerie whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. And then there was the psychograph, a short-lived invention that claimed to detect emotional emanations from spirits nearby. It looked suspiciously like a child's toy crossed with a metronome, and the only thing it consistently detected was gullibility. You find a dusty device on the shelf now. It's made of brass and glass, with spinning dials and a compass-like needle. A placard reads, "Etheric proximity meter patent pending." Sure. Let's test it. You twist the dial. Nothing. Then the needle twitches. Once. Twice. Slowly, it begins to spin, faster and faster, until the whole device hums softly like a teacup on the verge of cracking. You set it down, carefully. There's no point in asking whether it's real. Like most things in this house, it probably depends on how much sleep you've had. One particularly ambitious inventor in 1895 built what he called the spectrographophone device meant to record voices of the dead, using wax cylinders and electromagnetic coils. He claimed it worked perfectly, until his wife asked why all the ghost voices sounded suspiciously like him muttering through a paper towel roll. Still, his blueprints survived. They're quite detailed, and quite useless. You glance once more at the photographs. The ghostly figures are still there. Not moving, but also not quite still. And for a moment, you feel what the Victorians must have felt. The thrilling sense that between this world and the next, there's just enough overlap for a photograph to catch something you missed, or wanted to see. You step out of the room slowly, and behind you, the bellows of the old camera collapse inward with a snap, like a closing eye. You drift onward, deeper into the house, and the scent changes something like aged paper, damp velvet, and just the faintest trace of iron. The corridor narrows again, then opens unexpectedly into what appears to be a lecture hall. Rows of creaking chairs curve around a central dais. The walls are draped in midnight blue, and above the stage hangs a curious emblem, a triangle within a circle, surrounded by arcane letters too smudged to read. A low chandelier glows with the soft, flickering light of gas lamps. And on the stage, a pair of heavy doors, bolted shut. Welcome to the spiritualist stagecraft era where séances weren't just private rituals, but full-on theatrical productions, often hosted in rented halls, hotel ballrooms, or custom-built séance theaters designed to dazzle, confuse, and, ideally, convince. Tonight's show is about to begin. You settle into a chair with worn arms and notice a folded program tucked into the seat back in front of you. You open it. It reads, "The medium Mrs. Lavinia Hartley presents. Revelations from the Other Side, with phosphorescent appearances, rapping spirits, and celestial music, all guaranteed genuine. There's even an intermission for refreshments." This was not uncommon. By the 1880s, public seances were a booming business, especially in cities like London, New York, and Chicago. Mediums booked theaters, sold tickets, and performed to packed houses, often accompanied by live musicians and assistants hidden in clever compartments. Your mainstream historical fact. One of the most famous of these performers was Florence Cook, a medium who became internationally known for manifesting a spirit named Katie King. In elaborate séances, Katie would appear in full-body form, interact with sitters, and even pose for photographs. Naturally, skeptics cried foul. In one now-famous incident, a participant physically grabbed Katie King mid-séance, claiming she was Florence Cook in disguise. The lights were turned on, chaos ensued, and the séance was quickly shut down. But others insisted Katie and Florence had been seen together in the same room, proof, they said, of genuine spirit materialization. Historians still argue whether Florence Cook truly believed in her work or knowingly manipulated her audiences. Some even suggest she was pressured by her sponsors and male patrons into producing results they demanded, turning each séance into a kind of existential improv under gaslight. Your quirky tidbit. To enhance the experience, some theaters were equipped with trapdoors, false mirrors, and hidden wires to produce gusts of wind or make furniture levitate. A few more enterprising mediums rubbed themselves down with phosphorus oil before entering a dark séance room, allowing their faces and hands to glow faintly, giving the illusion of spectral presence. It did not, however, smell great. You glance toward the bolted doors on the stage. Slowly, with a groan, they open. A woman in heavy skirts steps out. Her face is pale, powdered, framed by tight curls, and she carries a dark cloth she unfurls as she speaks. Her voice is calm, low, rhythmic. You can't hear every word, but you catch phrases. They come willingly. No fear, only curiosity. If the veil is thin enough tonight. She steps back, and the lights dim further. Then begins the rapping. First faint like knuckles on wood. Then sharper, 3 precise knocks from the ceiling. Audience members gasp. One shrieks. The chandelier sways slightly. And somewhere behind you, a chair creaks as if someone invisible has just sat down. You try not to look. On stage, the curtain behind the medium shimmers. A shape appears, wispy, tall, humanoid. It sways as if moved by an unseen breeze. A specter, in other words. Whether it's cloth, smoke, or suggestion, you can't tell. But it's remarkably convincing in this dim, gaslit space designed specifically to trick your brain into belief. And trick it does. You begin to understand how entire rooms of respectable Victorians could leave such performances in tears, convinced they'd heard a mother's voice or seen a son's silhouette. The combination of visual sleight of hand, suggestive monologue, and sensory deprivation was powerful even without real spirits. A famous exposé in 1882 by magician John Neville Maskelyne revealed the mechanics behind many mediumistic miracles, from hidden assistants and secret panels to the clever use of black velvet and chalk. He recreated entire séances on stage to show the trick step by step, yet people still return to the originals. Because for many, the illusion was the comfort. Maskelyne once said, "A man may know he is dreaming and still wish not to wake." You watch now as the specter fades. The rapping stops. The medium bows. The lights return. The crowd breathes again. Then, quite suddenly, a final puff of smoke issues from the floorboards and the stage is empty. Applause fills the room. You chuckle quietly. Even asleep, the human mind wants theater. And the Victorian spiritualists? They knew exactly how to provide it. As you stand to leave, you glance at the program once more. The final line reads, "All appearances authentic. The management denies all claims of hallucination." How generous of them. As you step through the exit at the back of the hall, a voice-ear recording, a memory, follows you faintly. This way, dear, there's more to see. And so there is. Now, as the corridor begins to narrow once more, the very air seems to change. The temperature doesn't drop exactly, but it still feels cooler. The walls close in, thick with velvet drapes and heavy with silence. You've reached the end of the line, or at least the final room in this strange, sleep-drowsed mansion of spiritual mischief. This last chamber isn't theatrical like the séance stage, or technical like the photography room. It's quieter, dimmer, more personal. There's only one thing here, a Victorian parlor room, perfectly preserved. A place where the boundaries between furniture and faith, spectacle and sincerity, fully blurred. It's the twilight of the movement, the fading of the séance era, and the beginning of something else, the slow domestication of the paranormal. Gone are the big-ticket events and famous mediums. What remains is a small circle of women in high collars, gathered around a table on a quiet Sunday evening, trying to reach Uncle Henry one last time. You cross the room slowly, your hand brushing the edges of an ornate Planchetian early Ouija board precursor, shaped like a teardrop, fitted with a tiny pencil and mounted on wheels. It sits atop a tablecloth embroidered with roses and stitched prayers. This is how many seances ended up: homemade, casual, almost sweet in their sincerity. Less Houdini, more book club. Your mainstream historical fact. By the turn of the 20th century, scientific scrutiny and increasing fraud exposure had severely tarnished spiritualism's reputation. Public mediums were being exposed weekly, and newspapers regularly ran columns on how to spot a fake. Even the Society for Psychical Research, originally founded to study spiritual phenomena, shifted focus toward psychology and subconscious suggestion. Still, the movement didn't vanish, it just moved indoors. Spiritualism became a quieter ritual, woven into domestic life. Families built parlor shrines, hosted table tipping sessions, or kept detailed spirit diaries recording messages they believed were transmitted through flickering flames or sudden chills. And yes, some still used elaborate furniture, just in smaller, cozier settings. You spot a side table near the fireplace. There's a stack of old letters, a teacup, and a long snuff candle. Beneath it all lies a calling card. Mrs. E. Dunworth, medium and light bearer, evenings only. Even in decline, mediums adapted. Some took out newspaper ads offering remote seances. Others sold spiritualist guides by mail, full of instructions for communicating with loved ones on the astral line. Your quirky tidbit. One London woman in 1912 designed a séance teacup, a porcelain cup with letters etched inside the rim and a special weighted saucer. As the sitter stirred, the spoon would tap out spirit messages, guided, she claimed, by invisible hands. Her best customer was a retired mailman who received regular updates from his late terrier, Bixby. Historians still argue whether this late-phase spiritualism was a form of residual belief, simple grief, or something more complex. A coded space for women, especially older, unmarried honesto, maintain influence, purpose, and intellectual control in a world that kept trying to pack them away like last season's corsets. The spiritualist parlor gave women a place to lead, to speak, and to be listened to, even if the conversation included a ghost or two. You run a finger along the edge of the fireplace mantel. It's carved with ivy and doves. A photograph rests in the center, a young boy, blurred at the edges, wearing Sunday clothes. Beneath it is a caption, handwritten in brown ink. Still here. Still listening. The clock on the mantel begins to chime, soft, hollow bells that echo through the room. And then a whisper. It's almost too faint to catch. Something like, "Thank you for visiting." Or maybe that was just the wind through the chimney. Behind you, the parlor fades into shadow. There's nowhere else to go. You've walked the full spiral of Victorian seance culture, from its candlelit beginnings in cramped parlors, through its theatrical golden age, into the dusty corners of pseudoscience and gadgetry, and finally here, a quiet room, a waiting chair, and a memory that maybe isn't entirely yours. And now, it's time to rest. But before that, here's your wind down, just a little stretch of stillness before sleep wraps itself around you like velvet. The floor softens beneath your feet, like moss, and the light from the fire becomes more golden now, flickering gently across the walls. Each shadow stretches and blends, becoming less like form and more like memory. The house no longer creaks. It exhales. The air smells of cedar and dry roses, of old paper and linen sheets. You're not quite standing anymore. You're reclining. Floating, even. Outside, the window no longer bricked, but wide, open, soft night rolls in. The stars aren't blinking. They're simply watching, in the most peaceful way. Nothing rustles. Nothing stirs. The ghostly chairs stay still. You feel something like a sigh, but it might have been yours. There's no need to question what was real, what was staged, or what was imagined. Tonight, it was all for you. And as your breath slows, each thought slipping gently from the stage of your mind, you realize, even the loudest stories fade best in quiet rooms. No spirits follow you home. Just softness. Just rest. Just sleep.